Hello. So what is the Platemaker Wizard? Well, if you're a scientist who does microtiter plates, then this program is for you, as it will transform your data analysis. So the first question I want to ask you all is, what does a 3/8 4-well, a 96-well, a 6-well and a 1536-well plate all have in common? And the answer is they all produce this, a 2D matrix of numbers. And those numbers represent your hard work that you've done in some experiment. And if you work for Big Pharma, then you may even produce this type of matrix of a 1536 well plate if you're really into high throughput screening. Now these numbers represent the measured or dependent variables, as mathematicians call them, of an experiment. And in a biological experiment, each of these numbers will be associated with the experimental conditions, or what we call the independent variables of the experiment, of the particular well that is being screened. And as you know, if you're a biologist, these independent variables can typically include many things like cell line, time points, compound name, dose, ligand identity, lysate composition, irradiation status, and so on and so on. Now also, if you're lucky enough to possess a high content screening instrument like an array scan or an in-cell analyzer, then not only does your microtiter plate have many independent variables attached to it, but it may also return many simultaneous dependent variables. And these might include things like cell count, readings from the green channel, readings from a red channel, readings from a far red channel, and also processed morphology data, which can include many different readings. So this means that each well of your microtiter plate can be associated with many different values. You might have, say, up to 5 independent variables. These could be all numbers, where this is a dose or a time point, or it could be a cell line identity, a name. All these variables need to be captured. But also you might, if you're doing a high content screening experiment, have simultaneous dependent variables or measurements coming from the well. So you have a very complex data set. So how do we visualize and make sense of such a complex data set? Well, all data visualizations, as far as I know, must actually be represented in 2D. I don't see many scientists making 3D models of their data. And at best, that means that we can just about deal with a 3D representation in 2D, if we so choose to look at graphs like this. But in general, these graphs are pretty limited and actually aren't very helpful often. For instance, I don't know about you, but this second graph here I would find hard to understand in terms of looking at it. So this means invariably that most scientists still choose to plot their complex data into either 2D graphs or perhaps heat maps. But this means that effectively we must take this complex data entity and reduce it down in data dimensionality so that we can graph subcomponents of it into 2D graphs or heat maps or some other type of data visualization. Now, practically speaking, this also means that often what happens is we end up just generating a lot of graphs from our microtiter plate experiment. For example, here is a simple experiment where we have dose response curves for each compound on the microtiter plate. And this can take a long time if we're using high quality graphing programs like GraphPad Prism. So what the Bensonian Platemaker Wizard does is it solves a lot of these problems simultaneously. Firstly, it allows the scientists to describe their microtiter plate experiment no matter how many independent variables it contains. Secondly, it aids in the practical design of a microtiter plate experiment by allowing the experimentalist to optimize the layout of their experiment on the fly using Platewizard plate maps. As you'll know if you're a biologist, sometimes actually designing complicated plate layouts for microtiter plates can also be time consuming, and often being able to visualize quickly a different layout can be very helpful. Thirdly, it creates the appropriate Excel plate containers to place all the measured variables being returned from your plate reading instrument. Fourthly, it creates a single table that associates all the independent variables with the dependent variables of any experiment. This then allows the scientist to reduce the dimensionality of the data into appropriate tables for graphing and data visualization purposes, and practically this means that it can also automate exporting of the data and the creation of the appropriate graphs in GraphPad Prism. And it is this last point that I'm going to demonstrate just to give you a feel for how powerful this program is. Finally, the Platemaker Wizard also keeps your workbooks that you create using it completely organized on your hard drive, whether that be a network drive or your local drive, so that all your workbooks are easy to find and can be accessed by any member of your experimental team. And it goes one step further in that the Platemaker Wizard also comes with a complete experiment register, which is an access database. So once again, all your experiments can be neatly organized into records, so you can quickly drill down from high-level project names straight into the raw data that was returned from your microtiter instrument, so you have a complete audit trail from the high-level data visualizations all the way down to the raw data. And this is something that is becoming more and more necessary for modern publications, as many journals now require a much better audit trail from their scientists in terms of how they got to the visualizations and the raw data that lies behind those visualizations. So the Platemaker Wizard sorts all this out for you. So let me show you just one aspect of the Platemaker Wizard, and that is the automation and generation of high quality GraphPad Prism graphs. So here I have one of the workbooks open, and you can see from the plate maps that this was actually a simple time course experiment. And what we were doing was we were testing 5 different compounds at different doses at different time points with controls in the last 2 columns. I'm not going to go into the details of this experiment, but it is included in the first tutorial if you want to watch that. The machine has just simply returned 2 plates of absorbance data. And what we're going to do now is we're going to graph these compounds, each compound, by the time course, looking at the different doses. So let's do that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over to some graph templates. These are provided as demonstrations with the Platemaker Wizard. And you can see I have this single time course template. Now this is just a standard Prism graph file, but I'm just going to open it. So all I've done here is you can see it's just a single data graph, and I've just formatted it the way I want it. So this is a nice little format graph I've created. But obviously now what I want to do is I want to see each compound. And of course, if I was doing this manually, I would have to cut and paste, create different data tables, and then cut and paste bits of data to get all the different graphs, and that would take time. Let me show you how I do this with the Platemaker Wizard. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to close this. I'm going to go into here, and the first thing I want to do is I need to create the appropriate pivot table that will slice the data in the way that I need it to export to Prism graphs. So I'm going to do it this way. So I simply go up here, I go create statistical summary table, and what I want is it's a time course. So I'm going to put the EGFR exposure time into rows. I want to put the dose into the columns because I'm going to look at different doses, and I want the compound into filters. I want experiments into filters because I want each experiment. I want to calculate the standard error of mean, and I simply click OK. And once I do that, you'll see it's now generated the appropriate table that I need to export to Prism graph. So now all I'm going to do is I want DMSO present in all my graphs, so I'm simply going to click on DMSO. Again, this is explained in the first tutorial. I'm then going to go add-ins, I'm going to go generate Prism graphs, and then I want each compound as a graph title. I also want each experiment as a graph title. I want all these graphs, and I just need to now select the template that I showed you. So this is the time course template, and then finally I simply push generate graphs, and instantly the Platemaker Wizard steps through all the different filters to produce all the different data. It then exports it to Prism graph, and it runs a Prism graph script file to produce the appropriate file and the absorbance graph. So now if I click on this hyperlink that's created, you will see that when I open this hyperlink, I now have the template has now created a new file with all the data, all the appropriate data exported. And you can see that now I can step through each graph. You can see each drug, each individual experiment, and all the data has been created in that one simple step. So I've managed to quickly create 24 graphs of data within a minute, which is much quicker than if you have to do it by hand. So that is just a quick demonstration of what the Platemaker Wizard can do for you. But in fact, if you click on tutorial 1, all this is covered in tutorial 1. So you can see tutorial 1 covers all this information, and it teaches you all the different things that the Platemaker Wizard can do in terms of adding Z prime pages, importing data, cleaning up data, adding heat maps, adding statistical summary pages we've just done, generating prism graphs. And the second import example is actually the one I've just done. So I've actually just worked through pretty much generating the time course experiment, but you would get to do that yourself. You can do this all for free. You can download the wizard using this button here and install the wizard. Once it's installed, you can do tutorial 1, and it will take you through all the analysis, and it will show you the power of the wizard in terms of doing the analysis. And then should you like the program, you can purchase a single license here. And then once you have registered the program using the registration page here and activated the software, you can then work through all the other tutorials which will teach you how to build any workbook and describe any experiment that you might do in your lab. Note also the Platemaker Wizard supports templates. So if you come up with an experimental design that you use all the time, you can save that as a template, and you can simply run the template over and over again to create the appropriate workbooks as many times as you need it. Okay, so that is a brief description of the Platemaker Wizard. I hope you will think about installing the software as a trial and just check it out, because I promise you it will completely transform the data analysis of all your microtiter plate data. So hopefully I'll see you in tutorial 1. Bye for now.